Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome back to A House Divided, coming to you from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago. If it's on our shelves, it's history. My name is Bjorn Skaptesen, and I am your host for today's event. Now, today we will be discussing Vicksburg. We'll be discussing Vicksburg with Dr. Timothy B. Smith, who is writing a ton of stuff about Vicksburg. So we're going to get back to Dr. Smith in just a moment. Tim Smith is teaches history at University of Tennessee, Martin, and he writes books about Civil War history. And so a lot of you who are watching this already know Tim. Perhaps you've already been on a battlefield tour with him. He's one of the best public historians in the game. The book we are discussing today is Early Struggles for Vicksburg, the Mississippi Central Campaign and Chickasaw Bayou, October 25 to December 31, 1862. Comes to us from the University Press of Kansas, whom we thank for publishing these books. It is 576 pages, there's illustrations, there's maps, and it is $44.95. And let's take a quick look at it. Early Struggles for Vicksburg, the Mississippi Central Campaign, Chickasaw Bayou, October 25th to December 31st, 1862. And let's put this into context, Tim. Here is your series of books, which now appears that is going to be an 8-volume set. Congratulations.
Thanks.
So now, as we see from our illustration here, this is volume 1 of 5 about the Vicksburg campaign. And then people will always also want to get the Fort Henry book, Grant Invades Tennessee, Shiloh Conqueror Parish, Corinth 1862. And then I think Grant Gets Stuck in the Mud and 5 Battles in 14 Days are 2 potentially good titles for the next 2 volumes.
Yeah, I'll keep that under advisement. Actually, I already got the title for the next volume, but I'll keep the next one under.
Okay, sounds good to me. Tim, how did this work become an 8-volume set? I mean, did you think that you would write an 8-volume set when you started writing Corinth 1862?
Oh no, I never think that far ahead. Which I should, obviously. I always tell a story that when I was in graduate school writing my dissertation with John Marszalek, he would sit me down and say, Tim, why don't you think a little bit before you start writing? And I thought, well, that may be a good idea. And so, but on this, I didn't think far enough ahead. In fact, if you call it a trilogy on the Tennessee River campaign there, Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, then Shiloh, then Corinth, I actually wrote those out of order and backwards. I did Corinth first, and then did Shiloh, and then Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, which now it doesn't really matter. You can get all 3 and read them in order and so on. But I did not intend originally to do even a trilogy on those. And on these 5 volumes for Vicksburg, I originally intended to do just the assaults. In fact, this was years ago when Mike Ballard, everybody knows Mike Ballard, had planned to do a book on the siege. And I wanted to do something on the assaults, and talked to him one day and said, what, with this step on your toes, if I did the assaults? And he said, oh no, you do the assaults, I'll do the siege, and we'll cover it. Unfortunately, Mike passed away and never did it. So when I finished the assaults book, I thought, it'd just be logical to go on and follow the story on through the siege. And so I did that. And then I thought, well, goodness, I've got 2 volumes already done. Why not go back and do some of the kind of a Star Wars thing, do a prequel, if you will. And it wound up as 5 volumes. And so that's why they're a little out of order. But again, once they're all out, it won't matter, I don't guess. So
now, before we get to Early Struggles at Vicksburg, walk us through the logic of 5 volumes. Aside from the fact that you could have just written one 5,000-page book that we could use for a doorstop. No, but there is, from looking at your preface here, from your introduction, there's logic in these 5 volumes? It needs to be 5 and not 4 and not 6. And what do you say to that?
The standard, of course, is Ed Barr's 3 volumes, which covers the first 6 attempts in 1 volume, the inland campaign in 1 volume, and then the assaults and siege in 1 volume. And that's, standard, and that's perfect, except for the fact that I wanted to do, and this is what originally started all this, I wanted the assaults to have a book on their own, because really it's the largest battle in the Vicksburg campaign. Rivals as big, as any other battle, save Shiloh maybe, in the whole Mississippi Valley campaign. And so it really needed a detailed tactical study in and of itself, just those siege or the assault operations. And so I wanted that to be different from the siege. And then, of course, went on and did the siege volume. So that breaks up what was Ed's volume 3 into 2 different volumes there. And then same thing with the earlier volumes. Again, Mike Ballard always preached that we really needed a volume on the Mississippi Central campaign in Chickasaw Bayou. It should be a separate volume in and of itself. And I thought, he's right about that. And getting into it, it's so different. And I touch on this a little bit. It's so different in the way Grant conducts that campaign as opposed to what's coming in the future. And I put it in the construct of the Jomini versus Clausewitz and all of that. It's like light and day. And so it deserves its own volume as well. So Mississippi Central and Chickasaw Bayou gets a volume, and then the other attempts that I'm just finishing that volume actually. And sadly, already given it a name, so I can't use your Stuck in the Mud, but that may be a good subtitle. But finished, I'm sending that in the next month or so, a couple of weeks to the publisher. And then the inland campaign will be, its own volume as well. So I think 5 is the way to go. You could conceivably go back and do a prequel to, this volume and do the summer 1863 stuff or 1862 stuff and Farragut and all of that, Van Dorn and so on. But I don't want to go to the well one too many times and so on. So I'll leave that probably to someone else. So.
Yeah. Well, certainly the Ed Barr's book, Rebel Victory at Vicksburg, handles that summer of 1862 stuff very well. It would be a challenge to top that.
Right.
But I do think 5 volumes, I agree that 5 volumes is perfect for this, because these 5 books are all going to have their own standalone stories to tell. Each one of them are about military leaders trying to do some sort of plan. The plan develops and either works or it doesn't, and then kind of closes. And then the next book starts. Yeah.
That's why I intended these volumes to work together and be a 5-volume series, but they can also be read as a standalone book each. I'll add a introductory chapter or 2 in each one just to kind of set the stage so that they can be read, by themselves if somebody's just interested in a particular part of the campaign for some reason.
Right. Now, I'm a bookseller, so I think the people at home, need all of the books.
Oh, I agree.
But yes, if somebody, this is going to be so let's jump right into Early Struggles for Vicksburg, the Mississippi Central Campaign, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the first book ever written about the Mississippi Central Campaign. And certainly the leading figure in this book is U.S. Grant, I think. At least he's the figure that initiates the campaign and is either successful or isn't. So before we do too much in that book, let's tell me a little bit about what you've learned about Grant, particularly since the opening of the U.S. Grant Presidential Library, the papers of U.S. Grant, your access to these sort of things, which has just been a fairly recent occurrence. How does the role Grant plays in the story change in your book versus previous ones?
Well, we are learning a lot more about Grant. There's a real, I guess you could call it revival, or if you're on the other side, there's a definite change going on in Grant's reputation, particularly dealing with his presidency. You know, he's always been considered a failure and a scandalous president, and all of that. But people are starting to take a serious look at his presidency, and finding out that it maybe wasn't quite so bad as you know, some historians have said. Same thing with Grant the general. You know, Grant's a butcher and all that kind of stuff. Looking at Grant here, I kind of somewhat feel sorry for him a little bit, because for up until October 25th, and that's the start date, of course, Grant has been so under Halleck's thumb that he really can't do much of anything on his own, and has to do what Halleck says. And if that doesn't work, then Halleck jumps all over him, you know. So he's kind of in a no-win situation. But October 25th is when he takes command, semi-autonomous command of his department, and basically given free rein to conduct his operations any way he wants to. And as I write in the book and elsewhere, you know, it took him all of one day to start an offensive. After he took command, October 26th, he's starting to plan an offensive. And so we learn a lot about Grant, the independent Grant, you know, able to do his own things. And as we go forward, of course, we see Grant able to adapt, Grant able to mold the situation, to change, you know, to adjust. You hear a lot in baseball, you know, you come up and you're hitting everything, and then the pitchers adjust to you, and you have to adjust to the pitchers, and so on. So Grant does a lot of adjusting and adaptation throughout this campaign. And putting it in a larger sense, I think we see Grant really growing up as a commander, not growing up as a person, but as a commander. I did a article one time on the military education of U.S. Grant, and I likened it to the real education, not at West Point or anything like that, but in the field. And the 4 years of Grant in the Civil War match up almost exclusively to the 4 years in college that anybody has in college, you know. And so the first freshman year, you know, Grant's wide-eyed and everything looks easy to him. Excuse me. At Belmont, Fort Donelson, and all that. And I've said, you know, he's rookie of the year. If you assign a rookie of the year, we're getting in baseball here because the Braves are really tearing it up right now. But he's doing well. But then he hits that sophomore slump a little bit when things get a little harder and a little more serious. And that's the first part of the Vicksburg campaign here. But then that junior year, you start really figuring out what's going on. You're figuring out your major, and that's the rest of the Vicksburg campaign. And Grant really starts to figure this stuff out and mature as a commander.
Now, one of the things we'll get now into the book, early struggles for Vicksburg. One of the things that you bring up that is a different analytical framework than you've brought to other books is the concept of, let's throw up the scare quotes, the book. And so now there is a book that Grant's campaign can be evaluated against. And within the context of what you write here, what exactly do you mean by doing it by the book?
Well, it all goes back to Henri Jomini, the French military theorist coming out of the Napoleonic days, who wrote the famous On War, or no, that's Clausewitz, the something of war, the art of war, maybe.
Art of war, yeah.
Summary of the art of war. At any rate, Jomini had a very definite way of saying things should be done. And essentially that was what was taught at West Point under Thayer and Mahan and all those, West Point teachers, that Grant and all these other guys would have gotten, that emphasis. Maybe not strictly Jomini. Grant himself said he never really read it, but he only read the novels in the West Point library, not the trashy ones, but he says. But they certainly get this in the classes that they take, and that is really a reason that a lot if not most of Civil War campaigns look the same and come out about the same, and are largely indecisive because they're all patterned after Jomini in the way that he says do things, which, we could get into a lot of discussion on this, but take decisive points, keep very secure supply lines, use supporting columns, concentration of troops, all of that kind of stuff. And so
take land, right?
Geographical points
take geographical points, and then the enemy will have to throw up their arms and say, "Ooh, you won."
Exactly. Yeah. And so if you look at what McClellan's doing on the peninsula and Rosecrans in Middle Tennessee and all of the vast majority of these commanders, and I'm writing a book about this. Okay. Well, I'm doing Vicksburg now, but I'm actually thinking ahead this time, thinking about this.
John Marcellak will be proud.
Yeah. All of these are implementing what they had learned at West Point and basically distilled Jomini, and there are only a couple of commanders that figure out an alternate way of doing things, and that is more akin to the Karl von Clausewitz way of doing things, and that is almost, he doesn't really come out and say it, sort of does, but forget lines of supply, forget all of this, decisive points and all that, go at the enemy and take down the enemy, and the decisive points will fall and the capitals will fall and the politics and all that. He's big into politics and so on. So it's a kind of a different way of looking at things. And what's so interesting in the Vicksburg campaign, Grant starts out basically by the book, Jomini, who has been distilled at West Point and actually written in Americanized form by none other than America's chief military thinker at the time, Henry Halleck. And so when Halleck writes his Elements of Military Arts and Science in 1846 or whatever, that becomes the standard military theorist text. And if you're Grant under Halleck and you're given, Halleck's the commander, not the commander in chief, but the chief of staff and the commander of all the armies, and you're given your departmental command, and Halleck says, "Go get them." How are you going to want to do things? You're probably going to want to do things by the book, the way your boss wants it done. Halleck wrote the book, basically, the Americanized book of it. And so Grant is very, he writes later on, I knew Halleck. I knew what he wanted me to do. I knew how he wanted things done. And so what we see in this volume is Grant trying that. Grant tries to do the decisive points and the supporting columns and the secure supply lines and all that kind of stuff. And it just doesn't work. And so Grant, what you'll see in the next volume is that Grant basically just throws out the book and starts trying to, cut canals to change the course of the Mississippi River, which Jomini never talks about anything like that. And he starts digging canals and flooding the Delta, to flood the enemy out. And Jomini never talks about anything like that.
Yeah.
The biggest thing, of course, he starts to ultimately cut off his supply line, and not nearly as secure a supply line. And Jomini would be rolling over in his grave if he knew that, So Grant begins to figure out, if it's not an entire move over to Clausewitz like it will be later in the war, and then later America's military will go 100% Clausewitz, by the late 20th century. And Clausewitz is the guy now, that all the military talks about. But Grant is figuring this out well before Clausewitz is even published in English in 1873, let alone before the principles of war are established or before the American military goes full Clausewitzian and all that. So Grant kind of figures it out on his own. And I don't know if I've said this on your program or not. I can't remember what I say from time to time, but I kind of liken it to Barbara Mandrell. Barbara Mandrell. He was country when country wasn't cool. Well, Grant was Clausewitz when Clausewitz
wasn't cool.
But he figured it out largely by common sense.
Yeah.
And what we see through the course of the Vicksburg campaign, this is what I mean when, that junior year of Grant's college experience, his military education, when he really starts to figure things out, the light bulb kind of comes on. Grant starts figuring out, the book's doing me no good here, particularly in this environment of the Mississippi Delta and the Mississippi River and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
The book is doing me no good, so I'm gonna throw out the book and start going against the book. And lo and behold, the more Clausewitzian common sense types of things really work better here, and that's how he'll continue on, for the rest of the war like that.
Now, personally, one of my favorite things to study is campaigns where nothing happens, because that's certainly the campaigns that nobody's written any books about. And
no battles.
What's that?
No battles like Tullahoma.
Yeah, no battles. Yeah. But looking into campaigns like the Mississippi Central Campaign and asking yourself, why do no major battles occur, is as interesting a topic as Shiloh with cannons and muskets and all the rest going right and left. So when you look at the Mississippi Central Campaign, first of all, there are many violent conflicts that make great stories, such as the battle at Coffeyville and the crossing of the rivers, and then certainly the Van Dorn raid becomes the key piece to that part of the campaign. But if you had to summarize this Mississippi Central Campaign that nobody has yet read a book about, what would you say? What would you say is the core of that campaign?
Well, Grant begins to move toward Vicksburg, which is the goal. Back in, a year ago in June of 1862, the War Department was telling Halleck, I presume you were going to Vicksburg, right? So Vicksburg is the key, as Lincoln says. And so once Grant gets this authority in late October, his own departmental command, he says, all right, I'm going after Vicksburg. And the common theoretical thought process, best practices, if you will, to put a term from now to then, would be to go down the railroad and move forward incrementally, taking decisive points. We'll get to Holly Springs and we'll stop and open the railroad to there. So we'll have a secure supply line. And then we'll move on down past the next river to Oxford and we'll open up the railroad to there. Then we'll move on down to Grenada and we'll open up the railroad there. So this is by the book type of stuff. Grant figures out that it's very difficult to supply your army with just one single railroad, though, especially with Confederates hitting his rear, both Van Dorn and Nathan Bedford Forrest, your guy. I know how much you like Forrest, but back in West Tennessee. But even before those raids, Grant figures out this may not be the way we need to go all the way to Vicksburg. And so given politics and so on, there's another avenue that's just as secure, probably more secure in terms of transportation and supply and so on. That's the Mississippi River. Lincoln and Stanton have given that task to McClernand, and Halleck is kind of in a difficult position. He's trying to tell Grant, we got this McClernand stuff going on, and Grant's still going down the river, and Grant's still going down the railroad. And so Grant and Halleck are talking two different things here almost. One, Halleck's talking about the McClernand movement down the Mississippi River. Grant's talking about the movement down the Mississippi Central. And it's not until early December that Grant starts to figure out, okay, let's take part of my army and make the river the major thrust here, and we'll send Sherman down there to take Vicksburg before McClernand arrives, and the whole problem will be solved. The political problem, the military problem, all these problems will be solved if we can take Vicksburg before McClernand shows up. And so Grant kind of shifts over to the Mississippi River. That will end up, of course, in Chickasaw Bayou with Sherman getting whipped down there. And so by that time, of course, Van Dorn has hit Holly Springs. Forrest has hit the railroad bridges in Northwest Tennessee, and both have to fall back in defeat. And this by the book stuff just didn't work. So Grant starts looking at something different.
Right. And so I'm going to take a break here just for a moment to send a shout out to some of the people that are watching and have already said hello. If anybody who's watching on this live Facebook feed has a question for Tim Smith, leave your question right there. And even if you have a nice comment, leave it for you there. Tim, we have some shout outs we want that I want to give to you. We have Ed Wirtz sends his greetings from Alabama.
Yeah.
And then David Wiegers is watching here in Gurnee, Illinois. Mike down there in Texas says,
hey,
Mike says, two Shiloh guys talking about Vicksburg. Good stuff. Hey, they should consider themselves lucky that we haven't just decided to talk about Shiloh anyway.
Well, we can work it in anytime.
So. We can work that in anytime. Yeah. But if anybody wants to send in your own questions, I don't mind if you guys take charge of this interview and I'll just sit back and watch. So I'll keep checking on that. But what I want to do right now, Tim, if you don't mind, we will digress slightly. And I want to send everybody this information, just an acknowledgement of this day in history. Today in history, July 7th, 1865 was the date of the hanging of the conspirators in the Lincoln assassination. Today was a big day for Mary Surratt and George Atzerodt and Davy Harold and Payne/Powell. And so if you're interested in that, we do have also available to order Lincoln's Assassins, their trial and execution by James L. Swanson and Daniel R. Weinberg. And it is a history of the trial and execution of the conspirators in the Lincoln assassination by using the artifacts created, high definition reproductions of pictures and artifacts and so on and so forth. There's an excellent photograph by Alexander Gardner of the hanging about to occur. And down there at the bottom, Gardner writes for us, incidents of the war, sic semper secaris, which of course is a reference to John Wilkes Booth's proclamation after he shot the president, sic semper tyrannis, thus always to tyrants. And here Alexander Gardner repeats back, claps back at Booth, sic semper secaris, thus always to assassins. So if you are interested in learning more about the trial and execution of the conspirators in the Lincoln assassination, you can order from us Lincoln's Assassins by Swanson and Weinberg, and there'll be a link there in the comments. Tim, let's get back to Vicksburg. Unless you have anything to say about the trial and execution of the Lincoln assassination conspirators.
I'll leave that to the folks at the Lincoln Bookshop.
Okay. Well, we have plenty of books for you. So before we move on to the next phase of this campaign, these books that you write, and you talk about this in the introduction, they do fall into a genre that we're going to call new military history. And or at least they use a lot of the tools of new military history. And I myself am a fan of new military history. I could never quite understand those classic histories where they made battles seem like chess games, and generals are constantly hurling forward their right and checkmating the other one here like it's a game. These are flesh and blood human beings, and these are the events of their lives, sometimes the last event of their lives. And so bringing the stories of the social history and the cultural history and the political history into it, bringing specifically the soldiers into the military history story seems to me to be very important. And I think you feel that way too, since these books are filled with thousands and thousands of stories and quotes from the soldiers and the civilians and the participants. How do you weave them into the story, Tim?
Well, I think you have to. It's such an important part of it. And yeah, this new military history, you can go a lot of different ways with it. Some will do way more economic or societal looks at battles, or cultural, or things like that. Obviously, these books are still primarily military history. And that's why Kansas does such a great job. I love Kansas. They're one of the best military, if not the best military publishers out there, and so they do a great job.
I'm going to edit out that phrase where you said I love Kansas and just keep playing it over and over again.
Okay, yeah.
As a proud Jayhawker, I have to say that.
Yeah. I understand. But the major emphasis for these books in terms of the new military history is including the social, if you want to call it that, realm of the soldiers themselves. A lot of times with the older histories, we'll get strictly the generals, what the generals were thinking. And there's plenty of that in these books. But also want to know kind of a little bit what the soldier experience is like and what they're facing and so on. And so it's, that's part of the funnest part of this. There are obvious quotes that have been around for a long time that you'll see peppered into other histories and so on, from, for instance, Mollis, Military Order of the Loyal Legion, or Confederate Veteran, or Southern Historical Society papers, or something like that. But what I try to key in on more than anything and utilize more than, say, a regimental history that's been around for 100 years and been used 100 times or so, are the manuscript collections that are housed in, Springfield, Illinois, in the Lincoln Presidential Library, or the Indiana Historical Society, or the National Archives, or the Library of Congress, or something. That, some of these may have been used, but I'm not sure they've ever been used to the extent that they have here. And so it's a definite intent to let the soldiers speak about what's going on, probably as much as I am. Who wants to hear me say something about it? Let's let the soldiers tell what it was like.
And one of the things that you tease out in this book is that while Grant is grinding along that Mississippi Central Railroad, and his men are in camp or building a bridge or quartering a road or something like that, we are counting down the days to emancipation. And a lot of these soldiers have a lot to say about the upcoming emancipation. And of course, the formerly enslaved people are voting with their feet and flocking to General Grant's army. And that's a really interesting part of this story. And you tease that out really well, I think.
Well, it's easy to do because you just let the sources guide you. Because, if you read, I don't know, let's just say 500 different letters between, I don't know, December 1st and December 7th, 1862, and every single one of them are talking about, the contrabands that are following our army, or the slaves that are coming into our camps or something. And I'm just picking this out hypothetically. It must be important. Or if every single one of these letters between, November and December 1862 all talk about politics and the Copperheads and Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, you got a pretty good idea that it was on their minds and on their tongues, even in camp and so on. So yeah, the proclamation, preliminary proclamation, been issued in September, late September, of course, and it's going to be implemented on January the 1st. And so there's soldiers up in arms both ways, that we don't like this thing, or wish it would hurry up and come sooner, And what you're going to see in the next volume, actually, go ahead and tease that a little bit, is that once it occurs on January the 1st, there's bunches of soldiers' reaction to it, and especially the new part of the Emancipation Proclamation, the part about the black troops, which was not in the original, as I understand it, the original Emancipation Proclamation, the preliminary. Lincoln added that in the January 1st official edition. And so there's lots and lots of comments and arguments, and of course it's the height of the Copperhead movement and all of that as well. So lots of just like in this new military history, political and somewhat economic, racial, social, with the slaves and even the Jews and so on. So there's a lot of stuff, and I do like to keep all that in the context. I like to do the context, But again, my view of this is still that it's primarily military in nature. And so within that context, I'll develop the military moves
Sure.
of time. So
Exactly. And for me, that's very valuable, because if you have as valuable as they are, if you have a totally set apart book that's just about this thing, then it leads you to sort of compartmentalize uh,
right,
events that are, to the people that are living them, are all occurring at the same time.
right, right.
Mhm.
And
Uh,
even
Go ahead.
militarily, that's a good way to do it as well. Just another plug, I guess, for the book. We're plugging the book, so we might as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
But all of the other treatments of this campaign has been very, I won't say topical, but it's been, what's the word I'm looking for? Most everybody deals with Chickasaw Bayou as
Mhm.
one thing. And then the Mississippi Central is one thing, and then Van Dorn's raid is one thing, and then the forest raid is as one thing, and it's chopped up into different sections. But what I've tried to do in these volumes and the other volumes as well is to take it in a chronological narrative that shows you all of this stuff going on at the same time, and I
Mhm.
think it lends credence to the idea of just how complex um, this campaign is, not only militarily but also politically and economically and socially and all
Right.
that as well. So,
Well, speaking of breaking down those silos, you would certainly sometimes go over here and find another book about the Navy. And then so the book is just about the Navy. Well, of course, the dust jacket of your book shows that the Navy had quite a problem. Commander Selfridge, in particular, had quite a problem on the Yazoo River. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about writing the whole campaign story and now weaving the Navy into the same story rather than writing some other book about the Navy.
yeah. Well, obviously the Navy is so important to these river and waterborne operations, particularly that we're going to get into in the next volume. But even the siege and just getting the Army down there and all of that. And that's a precursor, of course, to today's combined arms, combined operations, and so on that the military is so fond of today. And so, yeah, we could use, and I've often thought, wouldn't mind writing a book on the Navy at Vicksburg. I think that would be a fascinating topic. But to weave it into the regular campaign histories and so on is, I think, integral, because Grant can't do, particularly coming up. And I keep referencing this book because I got it on the brain. I'm editing it right now. But the Navy is just so integral in what's going on, and certainly in the Chickasaw Bayou campaign or effort. You're not getting there without the Navy, and not going to have the support and so on. So, yeah, the naval operations are extremely important there. Lost the Cairo on the 12th of December, and of course that's a whole fascinating story in and of itself. It winds up at Vicksburg and so on. So very important. Navy's part in this.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly by having the destruction of the Cairo being on the dust jacket illustrates that that is an amazing part of the story. Did you
And
go ahead?
somebody say one of the coolest things that just kind of blows my mind is you want to do research in the National Archives.
Mhm.
Fortunately, the War of the Rebellion, the official records, has published a lot of what's in the National Archives. You don't go have to hunt through, the ledger books and all that kind of stuff. Although there's a whole lot more in the National Archives than what made it into the official records.
Mhm.
But still, I do ample research in the National Archives. But one of the coolest things to look at in the National Archives, and I just got through with this actually on a trip just last month up to Washington, is to look at the logbooks of the gunboats and
Mhm.
to the naval official records prints the reports just like the Army official records
Mhm.
do, and a lot of the logbooks are actually in the naval official records, so you can utilize those. But some of them, for some reason, aren't. And so, for instance, I was looking, I think, at the USS Pittsburgh, the ironclad Pittsburgh, and looking at
Mhm.
their their logbook from this time, and it's just amazing what all is in there. And to think this was on this ship or this gunboat at Vicksburg and all that. And I actually had one of those aha moments. I was looking at, I knew what was in the naval official records, what logbooks, and I was looking at everything else that wasn't. And so I was looking through the list of what logbooks they have and so on. And there are two ironclads that they don't have logbooks for. One is the Baron de Kalb, which was the St. Louis, but then it had to change its name to Baron de Kalb. And then just for kicks, I thought, well, I'm gonna look at the Cairo, see if they got anything for the Cairo. But there's nothing, no logbook for the Cairo, and no logbook for the Baron de Kalb. And I thought, that's odd. I wish there's something. It'd be just interesting to look at Cairo. But it dawned on me where the logbooks for the Cairo and the Baron de Kalb are. They're both at the bottom of the Yazoo River. When the Cairo was lost, logbooks were on the Cairo.
That's right.
The Baron de Kalb is still, it's probably in the bottom of the river that slew there at Yazoo City where the Baron de Kalb was lost. So there's still a gunboat at Yazoo City that Ed Barst didn't find. And so some enterprising somebody with plenty of money wants to go find it. Let's have a second gunboat, but we'd probably find the logbooks there as well. So.
Right. Now, did you find, when you're writing about that, was the stuff found on the Cairo at the Cairo Museum in Vicksburg valuable to you?
I'm not sure. I haven't checked with them. They did get a safe, but I don't think the safe was, I'm not sure whether it was damaged or open or what, but I had not heard of any logbooks, and certainly they wouldn't be readable. I wouldn't think.
Other than that, they had buttons and weapons and things like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, now I haven't used any of the physical artifacts, the weapons.
Right. All right. And then, but so the loss of the Cairo brings us to probably the most significant battle that's going to be in this book, and that is the Cairo is being followed by William T. Sherman and his expedition moving up Chickasaw Bayou. And I always admired Sherman for the brevity with which he summarized the Chickasaw Bayou battle. I failed. But you probably had to dig in a little deeper than Sherman wanted to, right?
Yeah. Sherman's not known for brevity on anything, when he opened his mouth. But he didn't have a whole lot to say about that, because he knew it was the worst whipping of his military career. He knew he'd been whipped.
Now, we've had a couple of people want to ask questions here, so I'm going to put mine aside so that those who are watching can get their questions answered. And Bill Shepard, watching from Lake Bluff, Illinois, has a Chickasaw Bayou question, so let's let him lead here. Bill asks, did Sherman's assault on Chickasaw Bayou have any realistic chance of success, particularly since Grant's planned attack from the north did not happen?
Right. Well, in a perfect world, all of them were supposed to act together, Sherman and Grant, and even Nathaniel Banks coming up from Louisiana, from the south. And Sherman is able to use that a little bit later on, that, we can't do everything. We didn't really fail. Nobody else just came to help us, kind of thing. The assaults themselves, if you go to the ground, and Bjorn and I were talking about this before the program, the battlefield is still relatively pristine. You can see the walnut hills and the bluffs themselves and so on, and really see how difficult it was. And then you add in crossing the bayous and all that kind of stuff, and it's a very, very strong Confederate position, made even stronger by the very few places that you can actually cross this bayou and attack the Confederate lines. And Stephen D. Lee actually leaves some of those areas open, goading the Federals to come in here. He wants them to come there and just mows them down. And so they kind of fall into the trap a little bit. I would say at that point on December 29th, there's no realistic way that Sherman's going to break those Confederate lines and break through. Now, the possibility, we don't know, is a what if thing. We have no idea. But when Sherman lands at the Milliken Bend area and Young's Point and all that, on Christmas Day, on December 25th, he spends a whole day sending a force down to break the railroad. Then he does another area. He doesn't land in the Chickasaw Bayou area until December 26th. And then he fiddles around on the 26th, and then the 27th, and then the 28th, and doesn't really attack the major attack until the 29th. And so some historians have wondered, and Stephen D. Lee himself said, if he had not messed around and come on and attacked even as early as the 26th, there weren't nearly as many troops that had been brought in from Grenada and even Tennessee and elsewhere that were already in the pipeline but start to arrive, that he would have had a much greater chance of breaking through at that point, certainly than he did on the 29th, when a whole lot more Confederate troops had arrived and more were in the process of arriving even then. So I won't say there is a chance, but if there was a chance, it would have been in the 2 or 3 days preceding, when there was a much less strong Confederate defense there than there was on the 29th.
Right. But as you and I were discussing before we started the program, he still would have had to get through that water. He still would have had to go over that bayou. The bayou, as we discussed, had this severe cut in some places, like 20 feet or so.
Right.
Bank they would have had to scramble up. How are you going to get your cannons up that? Yeah. And then it also occurs to me that this is part of the campaign, especially since it's Sherman that's going by the book.
Yeah.
So Sherman is going to make by the book decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Sherman actually quotes Jomini, or doesn't quote him, but references Jomini. You won't find many references in the official records to Jomini, but Sherman is one of them. So, yeah.
All right. We also have Stan Buckles is watching, and Stan says, hello, Tim.
Hey, Stan.
Stan's question is, it is my understanding that Grant was aware of Van Dorn's movements. Why did Grant not fortify Holly Springs with more troops? We're talking about the Van Dorn raid here.
Right. Grant does not learn of Van Dorn's movement until late on the 19th. Van Dorn hits on the morning of the 20th. There's a Union cavalry raid that runs into Van Dorn at Pontotoc, Mississippi. And that commander, T. Lyle Dickey, who is W.H.L. Wallace of Shiloh, we got to get Shiloh in there.
There we go.
Sends word to Grant. He knows this is something going on and probably going to Holly Springs. But the couriers, one set of couriers don't leave the column because of faulty orders and so on. Then he sends another set to Grant with information, and they get lost. And so it's only like late on the 19th when Dickey actually arrives in Oxford to tell Grant about this. And the information by then is like 30 hours old, and Van Dorn's just about to hit Holly Springs. But Grant immediately jumps into motion. He can tell immediately that, hey, this is something going on here. And so he doesn't know exactly where they're going. He orders his commanders at various railroad stations at LaGrange and Grand Junction and Holly Springs and Waterford and elsewhere, even on farther up the line to Bolivar and so on, to be prepared. We don't know where they're going, but they're going somewhere, probably going to hit our rail lines. He actually tells Colonel Murphy in Holly Springs, hey, watch out, they're probably coming to Holly Springs. But then there's this curious communication. Grant actually tells Murphy they're probably coming by a certain bridge, and Murphy telegraphs back and says, I know not this bridge that you speak of, where is it? It's not a good sign to begin with. And Grant telegraphs back and says, well, this is where it is, so on, but they probably won't do anything till in the morning, so you don't need to send your cavalry out tonight. Just wait till in the morning and do something. And Murphy's actually in the process the next morning of doing something when Van Dorn strikes. So and Murphy actually uses this later on in his defense. Say, look, Grant told me not to fool with it till the next morning, and by then it's too late. So there's plenty of blame enough to go around for everybody. Grant, as is his custom, he kind of deflects the blame. He's almost kind of Teflonish, like Ronald Reagan or something. That the blame doesn't stick. But It's a definite turnaround. And had he known more ahead of time, he probably would have had more troops defending Holly Springs. But you know, the line is so long, and there's so few troops along the line. Grant, that evening, the 19th, actually starts a brigade under Carroll Marsh moving northward toward Holly Springs. And so he starts reinforcements moving back to Holly Springs. They just don't get there in time.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Stan.
Yeah,
and then finally, Tom Ferris wants to say hi, Tim.
Who?
Tom Ferris wants to say
Okay.
hi. He says, Tim and Tom from Hernando, Mississippi.
Hernando,
Tom says, your books are great. They make history come alive when you do the actual history tours. As you've said, you got to get out on the fields of battle, and he hopes to see you soon. So thank you very much, Tom.
Tom, the chief, senior chief, or something. Anyway, in the Air Force there. So
all right. Now this does bring us to at least what we don't have much time left, Tim, but it does bring us back to at least one thing that I know we need to talk about, and you brought him up a couple of times before. We're to talk about these strategic value of these deep cavalry raids behind Grant's lines. But you know, now it's time for us to talk about the name that everyone has to say. And that, of course, you know, Tim, is the heroic defense of Lexington, Tennessee by Illinois' own Colonel Robert Ingersoll.
Ingersoll. Yeah. I thought
if there's anybody else whose name is attached with this raid into West Tennessee, I don't know who that guy is. But I've always wanted to read someone to write a good, concise story of that debacle at Lexington. And I think your treatment, it's in the Forrest's raid part of the book, your treatment of Lexington is just really concise and well developed. And the character of Robert Ingersoll, he was an interesting guy, you know?
He must have been, yeah.
I heard he lost a lot of money gambling with Forrest's staff.
Yeah. Ingersoll, he's a really interesting guy, and actually his papers are in Springfield, the Ingersoll paper. So somebody could do a biography or something on him. I've used them, but I don't recall how extensive they are. You get into some, like, you know, the McClernand papers are just there's like a folder for every couple of days, just chock full of, I mean, just tons of correspondence, more than you could ever want to use. You know, the Grierson papers are very similar to that. I don't recall off the top of my head the Ingersoll papers, how extensive they are, but there's definitely something there. But yeah, he's a character by all accounts, and he was not he was not able to stop Forrest for long, but he gave him a good laugh. But interesting little fight there.
Right. There is just as I noticed this, and it was really interesting. There is an Ingersoll biography that I've read, and it's totally an intellectual biography. The biographer hardly notices that he was ever in the Army at all. And all he wants to talk about is that post-war speaker. He has a speaker speaking at Chautauquas on atheism and agnosticism and stuff like that. And you could read that. You could read a biography of Robert Ingersoll and never know he was in the Army.
Never know he was in the Army. One of my favorite quotes, some Confederate who whipped him at Lexington said, if he didn't believe there was a hell, we sure showed him there was something mighty close to it.
Yeah, exactly. But let's go ahead and use at least a couple of minutes here. And I hope you don't mind if we go a couple of minutes long here, Tim. We started a little late. But we are talking about this very effective, strategically effective cavalry raid by Nathan Bedford Forrest and his troops into West Tennessee that both disrupts Grant's lines of communication, thus using Jomini to disrupt lines of communication. And Forrest virtually creates a cavalry division out of thin air by going into West Tennessee and just having everybody join.
You can't overemphasize Forrest raid. The Van Dorn gets all the attention, the Holly Springs raid and all that. But really, what first stops Grant's forward movement is when he gets word that Forrest is loose in West Tennessee. Forrest has crossed the Tennessee River. He receives word. And so he will immediately tell McPherson and Hamilton, hey, stop the forward advance because this can't be good. They're probably going after the railroads. And if they do hit the railroads, then that's probably going to cause us some logistical concern. Again, going back to the book, it's going to cause us some problems. So hang tight, stop where you are. He doesn't order them to retreat. That doesn't come till after Holly Springs. So the tandem together is what causes Grant to stop and then retreat. But Grant's initial stoppage of forward movement comes as a result of Forrest, even before Van Dorn they know anything about Van Dorn. So very critical. Will damage that railroad, the Mobile and Ohio, up around the Obion River, and you can go up there and see the bottom, and there's like 4 miles of just bottom land and trussels, and he breaks every bit of that, and it's a long time until the railroad is actually rebuilt, weeks and weeks and weeks, and maybe even longer than that. And ultimately, Grant will decide to just forget it. Let's. By this time, he's moved over to Memphis to move on down the river anyway. So forget the Mobile and Ohio Railroad. We didn't need it anyway. So, but yeah, Grant's or Forrest raid is extremely critical. And then he gets caught. Of course, I don't know if you want to talk about Parker's Crossroads.
Sure. I mean, Parker's Crossroads
he gets caught on the way in. So
it's on the last day of your book, December 31st, 1862. Yeah. And our mutual friend Tom Parson, I've seen him quip before, that it's a case of Forrest saying, "Hey, I had the enemy surrounded and I got away without a scratch."
Yeah, exactly. But he doesn't. He gets probably one of the worst whippings of Forrest's career. A lot of Forrest folks don't like to admit that, but Forrest, it was not his best day, and he got out with his tail between his legs pretty much.
Yeah.
But
they're going to have to buy the book to read that story, Tim.
Yeah.
And so before I wrap up here, and I have a number of things I want to tell the folks at home about upcoming events. What can we expect in the next 2 books of this series when we finally get our 5 books on Vicksburg and 8 books on the war in the West?
Right. Well, finishing up the next one, and hope to have it in to the publisher by the 1st of August or so, which hopefully will put it out then next year. And this will be a look from January 1st to April 30th. And basically the name of it will be the Bayou operations, or the Bayou route. I forget, Bayou battles. That's what it is. Bayou battles for Vicksburg. Dealing with Yazoo Pass and Steele's Bayou and Lake Providence and the canal and all that kind of stuff. And this is when Grant,
better than mine.
He has to. No, I'm on way yours, but at any rate, he has to do something to all this high water, waiting for the river to go down, the water to go down. And so he tries all these experiments, which he says in his memoirs, I really never thought they would work anyway. And they're just, I was just making busy work and biding my time. But if you look at the actual letters and correspondence at the time, he thinks every one of these are going to work. And he has high hopes for getting to Vicksburg on each of these. But again, none of them work, but they're all going against the grain. Jomini never talked about anything like this. And so Grant's kind of off on his own, thinking outside the box. So that'll go through April 30th when the last attempt, and most of the time historians cut it off on March 29th when the last attempt starts. But my idea is we need to lump all the attempts together until one works, and then pick up with the success that goes after that. So the middle volume, the 3rd volume, which will be the last one that comes out, will pick up with the May the 1st and go through May the 17th, and detail the inland campaign, the land battles there to actually reach Vicksburg.
Okay.
So and I haven't even started on that one. So.
Have you? Well, a thing or two. You've already written something about Champion Hill at some.
Yeah, I've done a little work on that. Yeah,
you done a little bit of work on that. But everybody's going to really look forward to those last 2 volumes. And as we know with Star Wars, you started in the middle and then you went back to the beginning. But it's It's not an alternative universe. It's the one we actually live in. It's just history. So
You mentioned Champion Hill.
yes,
And actually, there is worth mentioning maybe the difference. Champion Hill is a tactical study. The vast majority of the book's about the battle itself. What
that's
I'm
true.
doing in these volumes is more what the military today would call operational history, which is campaign level,
Okay.
not so much except maybe dealing with the assaults and so on in volume 4. But it's primarily, even Chickasaw Bayou, there's one chapter on the main battle, several chapters preceding that, and so on. But it's not a detailed tactical study.
Mhm.
These are more intended to be operational level. So the book dealing with Champion Hill and all that will be completely reversed. It'll be more the 17 days of campaigning, with just probably one chapter on Champion Hill rather
Yeah.
than the Champion Hill book, the vast majority of it on the battle itself and not much on the surrounding context. So they will complement each other.
Complement each other. Excellent. Well, for the folks watching at home, 3 of the books in this series are available to you, and we have those 3 books to sell to you. In addition to Early Struggles for Vicksburg, we have the Union Assaults at Vicksburg, Grant Attacks Pemberton, and we have The Siege at Vicksburg, which was published in 2021. And there are links in the comments to those 2 books. And, hey, coming up on A House Divided, our next program will be Thursday, August 4th, another military history. And Jeff Wirt will be on our program for the first time, where he will talk about The Heart of Hell, the soldier's struggle for Spotsylvania's bloody angle, a book that's just about May 12th at Spotsylvania. That's going to be a really interesting conversation, and you can start ordering those books right now if you want to. Tim, do we have anything else, any other last minute comments before we let you go?
No, I don't think so. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, always great to have you here. And I hope you're ready to come back 2 times more and sell 2 times more books as we finish up this series of books on Vicksburg. So to the folks at home, thank you for watching. Thank you for your comments and questions. And we will see you next time on A House Divided.